Hey guys, today I want to show you a clip from Jesse Watters Primetime with Vice President JD Vance, where he takes on the FBI, the trans-terrorism threat, and yes, Barack Obama's disgusting attempt to downplay the truth about Charlie Kirk's assassination. Take a look.
The FBI is now looking into as many as 20 or more other people who may have corresponded with this assassin beforehand. There may have been foreknowledge of the shooting. If there are co-conspirators here, what kind of threat level are we talking about?
Well, we don't know, Jesse, and that's why I've been so proud of Cash and the way that he's handled this investigation, because he's cast as wide a net as humanly possible, and the FBI really is looking at everything. By the way, there's a lot of weird stuff out there. For example, the CEO of Discord, or one of the leaders of Discord, said that there were no Discord chats that involved this guy. Now we know that there were Discord chats that involved this guy. So we need to look at everything. We need to leave no stone unturned. My own attitude to this, and people will send me stuff, Jesse, from the deepest, darkest corners of the internet. Some of it sounds pretty crazy, but I'll send it to Cash and I'll talk to my team because I want us to leave no stone unturned. It's the only way to honor Charlie is to get to the bottom of exactly how this person was radicalized and who else was involved in it. Now, we could find out that this person was radicalized and it was terrible and there were a lot of very evil people in his life, but they didn't have foreknowledge.
Right.
We may find out that there were many, many people who were involved in helping this guy pull off the shooting. We just have to get to the bottom of it. That's what justice demands. That's what being a good friend to Charlie demands.
The militant transgender movement, is that a domestic terrorist threat?
If you are encouraging people to commit acts of violence against the United States government or against your fellow Americans, absolutely, you're involved in a terrorist movement. I don't know enough about that particular organization, but what you increasingly see, Jesse, is you see people in the trans community and other members of the far left who are saying they are so threatened by negative rhetoric that they must take arms and attack people. If your movement is telling you to commit acts of violence against people for speaking words that you don't like, number one, you're evil, and number two, you are engaged in a terrorist movement, and that's part of what we have to root out in the White House. And this is very important, Jesse. I've talked to a lot of people about this. I've talked to Stephen Miller probably 7 times in the past 2 days. We are working very hard to ensure that the funding networks for left-wing violence, that the radicalization networks for left-wing violence, that if you encourage or fund your fellow Americans or anybody else to commit acts of violence because you disagree with political speech, you are going to be treated like a terrorist organization, and we're going to go after you.
Because Joe Biden said white supremacy was the biggest domestic terror threat.
Which, of course, is absurd. The statistics don't bear that out. But if you look at what the Biden administration did against the phantom threat of white supremacy, we actually need to take some of the lessons and say, if there is funding sources that is going for this stuff, if you're an NGO and you're actually funding riots and other kinds of political violence, why wouldn't we go after that? Why wouldn't we cut off those funding sources? And why wouldn't we prosecute people who engage in violence? It's interesting, Jesse. The people who are saying this is Gestapo stuff, they're calling us Nazis for saying that if you're funding or supporting left-wing violence, you ought to pay consequences for it. It really makes you think that the left has not done any of the soul searching it has to do to actually deal with political violence in this country.
Jasmine Crockett says, yeah, she calls people Hitler, but it doesn't mean she's responsible for any violence that happens.
Well, I'd ask Jasmine Crockett, what is it that you want people to do when you call them Nazis? What is it that you want them to do when you call them fascists? What is the proper response when you say that Donald Trump and JD Vance and Charlie Kirk are threatening your safety? What do you expect people to do? This rhetoric is completely out of control, and it's part of this entire network of violence that exists on the far left. You dehumanize your political opponents. You fund paid activists to go and harass them and terrorize them. We've had a White House senior staffer just in the past week who has had actual representatives of the Democratic Party going around passing leaflets trying to get his neighbors to harass him and showing people where he lives, where his wife lives, where his young family lives. If that's not political violence, if that's not political harassment, I don't know what the term means.
Barack Obama says your White House is dividing the country and you're exploiting Kirk's death to attack Democrats.
Now, guys, pay attention to JD Vance's response here. This is classic Obama. When the left is caught red-handed, they deflect, they blame conservatives, they try to paint us as the dividers. The real question here is who's actually funding and fueling the violence in this country? Because it's not conservatives, and this is why voices like JD Vance are so important. He's not afraid to call out the networks behind the chaos. By the way, guys, if you think Obama is wrong on this, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up like button right now. It helps get this truth out past the media gatekeepers. Okay, now check out JD Vance's response.
We're not exploiting Charlie Kirk's death to do anything except for achieve justice. And I think if Barack Obama, I haven't seen that comment, Jesse, but if he said that, that's absolutely disgusting. What we're trying to do is understand how young people are getting radicalized and who is funding all of these efforts at radicalization. We saw this in the summer of 2020. Now, thank God that wasn't primarily, actually over 20 people died in the riots in the summer of 2020. That is political terrorism. But it's not just the people who are killing the cops. It's not just the people who are engaging and throwing the Molotov cocktails and in the riots. Where was the money coming from? Who was organizing this violent activity? That is not going after Democrats unless, by implication, you're saying every single Democrat is involved in planning political violence. If that's true, then the problem isn't on Barack Obama's side. We're going to get to the bottom of the truth, and we're going to stop the political violence. And we're going to do it however we have to do it, of course, within the constitutional limits that Charlie loves so much.
Joe Biden's FBI investigated Turning Point, investigated Charlie Kirk.
I found out a couple of days ago, Jesse, that Joe Biden's FBI investigated a dear friend of mine who's a political consultant. They were sicking law enforcement after their political opponents every single day. It's an open secret at this point. We're talking about having law enforcement go after the people who engage in and fund literal violence, and they're saying somehow that's beyond the pale. Even though we know Joe Biden's FBI was investigating Charlie Kirk, maybe they should have been investigating the networks that motivated, inspired, and maybe even funded Charlie Kirk's murder. If they had, Charlie Kirk might be alive today.
I'm glad we have transparency. We need transparency on this trial. Do you support putting cameras in the courtroom so we can see this assassin face justice?
You know, I've never thought of that, Jesse, but sure, I support transparency in all ways. I think having the trial, recorded, having it on TV, that strikes me as a good idea. But the most important thing I think that we can do as a government, aside from recording and actually televising the trial, is we just have to be honest with people about what we're finding. And we're really trying to do that. Look, investigations are complicated and difficult. There's a fog of war where a lot of information comes in. We're trying to screen it. I've told this to Cash. I've told this to our Department of Justice. The most important thing that we can do is just be honest about what we're finding, how we're finding it, when we're finding it, because I think that transparency is going to give people the faith that we're doing this the right way.
Well, I'd like to thank you for joining us. I know this has been a tough time. We were very close with Charlie Kirk. And I'd also like to thank our Turning Point students over here for joining us. Why don't you guys give Charlie Kirk a nice round of applause?
Here.
All right, guys. Now, what JD Vance is saying here is exactly what conservatives have been warning about for years. The FBI, instead of protecting Americans, has been weaponized against them under Joe Biden. They were investigating Charlie Kirk, Turning Point, even conservative political consultants, all while completely missing the real networks that were radicalizing and supporting political violence. Think about that for a second. They were more worried about silencing speech than stopping killers. And the trans-terrorism threat. The left doesn't want to talk about this, but the truth is absolutely undeniable. When movements are openly telling people to take up arms against Americans simply for speaking words that they don't like, that is terrorism, period. But Biden's DOJ and the FBI refuse to admit it, and because it doesn't fit their narrative, they continue to investigate places that weren't even involved in violence. They want you to believe that white supremacy is the only threat while left-wing violence grows and spreads unchecked. Guys, then you got Obama. We got to talk about Obama. And first of all, aren't you glad, guys, that Joe Biden is no longer in office and we've got Donald Trump, guys, in the chair now? Now, think about Obama. swooping in, accusing conservatives of exploiting Kirk's death. No, we're demanding justice. We're asking the real questions. Who radicalized the assassin? Who funded him? Who else was involved? If Obama wants to call that divisive, it tells you everything about where his loyalties lie. The left wants to demonize us, wants to silence us, wants to call us Nazis, call us fascists, and then act surprised when that rhetoric fuels real-world violence, guys, against conservatives. And the mainstream media will look the other way every single time. That's why transparency matters. That's why cameras in the courtroom matter. Full access to the evidence. Because if this trial gets buried behind closed doors, America will never see the truth. And we know how this game is played. The establishment protects its own while conservatives bury our dead. Guys, we cannot let that happen. JD Vance is right. No stone can be left unturned here. If there are funding networks, they need to be cut off. If there are agitators hiding behind nonprofits and NGOs, they need to be exposed. If there are politicians who know the violence is being fueled, they need to be held accountable, because justice for Charlie Kirk is justice for America. Guys, the fight isn't just about one man, but it's about whether truth still matters in our country. If you agree with me and you want to see more truth like this brought into the light, make sure you hit like right now, guys. Drop a comment down below. Subscribe to the channel, guys. I couldn't do it without y'all. Y'all are absolutely amazing. Every single one of you guys supporting the channel. I just appreciate you so much. We're going to keep cutting through the lies that the mainstream media is not going to touch. I'll see you in the next video.